If the Earth itself dropped off right at the Clark County line, most southern Nevadans wouldn't even notice. This is the road less traveled, the one that heads north, past vistas worthy of a postcard. Urban Nevadans rarely travel out into the vast valleys that are home to miles of sage and pinyon, never see the herds of deer and antelope that run free across the ranges, or waterfowl frolicking in hidden ponds at sunset. Few would recognize the telltale bubbles of a natural spring as its water percolates up through the rock and soil. Even the Great Basin National Park, one of Nevada's natural treasures, with its towering mountains and subterranean surprises, might as well be in a foreign, faraway land, too distant to visit. The small towns that typify most of our state outside of the Las Vegas Valley hold little allure for city folk. Rustic ranches that have supported families for generations seem quaint anachronisms to those of us who think food comes from supermarkets. This is the Nevada most of us know. Wildlife is what we encounter daily on our freeways. Our rural neighbors have made a conscious choice about where and how they want to live. But like it or not, Las Vegas, with all of its money and power and problems, is snaking its way toward them. After nearly 3 decades of relentless growth and sprawl, Las Vegas wants more. Multi-billion-dollar plans have been made to tap billions of gallons of water from under the rural counties. Without the water, Las Vegas will wither and die, civic leaders allege. So rural interests must be sacrificed for the greater good. This greater good.
Opponents call it a water grab. It will be the largest public works project in state history, with the potential to profoundly alter the natural balance over a vast area, including places like this. The people who will be most directly affected feel their voices are not being heard in Las Vegas, drowned out by the roar of construction cranes or the whir of slot machines. This program expresses a viewpoint, their viewpoint, our neighbors who are caught in the crossfire.
You're threatening people's existence, not just their lifestyle, but their existence.
When the water is gone, it's gone, and we don't have nothing.
So basically it's like it or not.
That is correct. That's correct. And we don't like it.
I believe it's about growth, and I believe it's going to be about drying up the Great Basin Desert.
Not only with water, but public policy. When you have an ideological approach to it, it produces a sequence of lies.
Are you willing to put your family at risk? That's what it gets down to.
It's going to be built, isn't it? You really honestly believe it's going to be built?
There is no option.
And I have to change out the tank for next dive.
In a craggy, off-limits grotto in the Nevada desert, scientists converge for a challenging assignment. An uncertain number of tiny, seemingly inconsequential fish zip in and out of the sun rays atop a narrow shelf of rock. The fish don't look like they're sympathetic enough to inspire a public uproar, but that's what's happened. The Devil's Hole pupfish are regarded as environmental icons, turning points in the fight to save endangered species. Twice a year, government divers plunge into the warm but treacherous waters of Devil's Hole to count pupfish. The species has survived in this isolated fishbowl for thousands of years, defying the odds. A rock shelf covered by 5 inches of water is the only place the pupfish will spawn. If the water drops below the shelf, the pupfish are history. It almost happened in the late 60s when farming conglomerates launched a water pumping program in the Ash Meadows area, causing the water in Devil's Hole to drop dramatically. It took a decision by the U.S. Supreme Court to halt the pumping and protect the pupfish. The little survivors became a flashpoint in the debate that still rages. Should endangered species prevail over economic interests? Because of the proposed water pipeline, the dispute is once again at the forefront.
The potential of removing the habitat for, as I count, some 20 listed endangered species and some roughly 137 endemic species that are restricted to springs and the wetland areas that those springs create. So in effect, a minimum of 150 to 160 species dependent on that. That's a tremendous loss of biodiversity.
Biologist Dr. James Deacon has spent 50 years studying rare fish and other critters in and around fragile water sources of the Mojave Desert. A lifetime of field research has led to a conclusion that he considers irrefutable. Any massive groundwater extraction from rural Nevada will cause the water table to drop in places that might be hundreds of miles away, places like Devil's Hole.
Groundwater systems are really complex, but in a sense they're also very simple. Recharge equals discharge. Therefore, if you don't change the recharge, and that too is changing with climate change, but if you don't change the recharge, every discharge you take out of that system will be accounted for by a loss of discharge someplace else.
In other words, if all groundwater sources in a particular region are connected at some subterranean level, any water taken from one place in the system is essentially taken from all places.
What we've, heard as we were growing up as Native people, that it is all connected.
300 miles from Devil's Hole, another endangered species is struggling to survive, the Goshoots. The Goshute Reservation, which straddles the Nevada-Utah state line, isn't exactly a garden spot. Of the 500 surviving tribe members, about 100 live here, scratching out a living by ranching and farming. For hundreds of years, the Goshoots have practiced what Las Vegas now preaches, sustainability, carefully conserving what water they have. Milton Hooper works as a resource conservation specialist for a government agency.
Well, in terms of conservation, in being very delicate out here in this arid region, it's best not to use a lot and to be cautious and to conserve what you have.
The Goshoots aren't going to sell their water to Las Vegas, but in the valleys west of their land, Southern Nevada water officials have purchased huge ranches, and the tribe fears that when the groundwater is siphoned from those areas, their own wells will dry up.
We believe in the water. It's our the main source in our life to make a living here.
If that water's taken from us, there's people here, they have places to go to, and we don't have any place to run to. This is our land and we're going to stay.
Adding to tribal anxieties is concern about the gigantic coal-fired power plants planned for the Steptoe Valley many miles west of the reservation. The Goshoots know that anything put into the air over there will eventually blow their way. It happened years before when a smoke-belching copper smelter operated near the town of McGill, not far from where one of the power plants will be built. Like most other indigenous tribes, the Goshoots have heard their share of lies and broken promises from governments and businessmen. They're reluctant to trust promises made by strangers.
I don't at all, either for the water situation or for the breathing situation, because it's the almighty dollar that speaks. And I think that's all that counts.
Are their fears exaggerated? Can billions of gallons of water be siphoned away with little or no impact?
So, my entire life's work, from nothing to what modicum of success we've been able to enjoy, is all out the window. For what? They're gonna name a sand dune after me?
From the vantage point of Nevada's tallest mountain, the 2 million square mile Great Basin looks like a sea of sand and sagebrush, an empty wasteland. It's a perception shared by much of the nation, Nevada as a wasteland, and is one reason our state was selected to be the country's nuclear waste dump. A closer look belies the false imagery. The Great Basin is a thriving, if delicate, ecosystem, teeming with rare and exotic life forms. Wheeler Peak, the centerpiece of Nevada's Great Basin National Park, is home to our state's only remaining glacier. Clinging to its stark sides are some of the oldest living things on Earth, bristlecone pines and groves of aspen. Underneath Wheeler, the amazing Lehman Caves dazzles visitors with its weird, twisted sculptures carved over eons. For thousands of years, the basin has been home to indigenous cultures.
My ancestors were able to live a sustainable lifestyle on the land for quite some time. Las Vegas seems to want to sustain unsustainable growth.
That, in a nutshell, is how rural residents like Rick Spilsbury see their David versus Goliath battle with the Southern Nevada Water Authority. Las Vegas wants to steal the water from under their feet, they say, so it can continue its explosive growth. More casinos, more condo towers, more everything. Urban sprawl is why Spilsbury left Las Vegas and returned to White Pine County, where he wages his own guerrilla war in the blogosphere, trying to fire up a larger audience.
I think every person up there is against it. I haven't spoken to one person that is even quiet about it.
It's not just our water, it's our whole future. And it's the future of every plant and animal that lives out here.
In the tiny town of Baker, gateway to the national park, the locals raise a few bucks for the cause by marketing their defiant slogans. Keep your pipes out of my aquifer, the t-shirts warn. Any visitor from Las Vegas willing to attach this bumper sticker to their car on the spot gets one for free.
A lot of people from Vegas who come up here say, I don't want any more traffic. I don't want to wait 10 hours in the emergency room. I don't want any more smog. And I haven't met too many people that go, oh, I think it's a good idea. In fact, I haven't met any.
In Ely, the White Pine County seat, opposition to the pipeline plan isn't unanimous, but close to it, even among transplanted Las Vegans.
We don't want them messing around with our water. Let them go somewhere else.
White Pine County is in a tough spot. It's essentially bankrupt, hard-pressed to provide even the most basic services. Southern Nevada water officials have offered millions of dollars if White Pine will stop fighting the water grab. But when two commissioners said it might be time to cut a deal, both were booted from office. Elected officials know the Water Authority plays hardball.
Every time I turn around, it seems like they're trying to figure out a way to keep White Pine County down.
There's a trust level that we don't have because we represent perhaps less than 0.5% of the population of the state of Nevada. We realize we don't have a lot of political leverage, a lot of clout.
A profound understatement. In the late 80s, Las Vegas water officials filed claims to groundwater over a vast area, rural valleys in Clark, Nye, Lincoln, and White Pine counties. 20 years later, the claims are being evaluated by the state engineer, and at each hearing, Las Vegas water officials are accompanied by teams of lawyers and experts, plus supporters from the casino and development industries. Water czar Pat Mulroy bristles at the suggestion that Las Vegas is stealing anyone's water.
To call this a water theft is really a stretch. This is Nevadans taking care of Nevadans. Everyone in Nevada benefits from the taxes that come from Southern Nevada.
Bankrupt White Pine is a bit underwhelmed by all the tax money it gets from Las Vegas, but it knows that water is a state resource, not a local one. Las Vegas can legally siphon water from rural areas, but it's still viewed as a raw power play. Just because groundwater isn't flowing into an artificial lake in Las Vegas doesn't mean it isn't being used. It supports plants and animals, families and farms.
This is underground water. It's coming from a well over there at the edge of the pivot.
In the Snake Valley north of Baker, rancher Dean Baker inspects his alfalfa fields with the I-Team's Mark Sayer. Baker is a third-generation rancher who uses spring water to raise cattle and corn and alfalfa. From the Las Vegas viewpoint, his operation is a waste of good water. Alfalfa is a water-intensive crop, especially when it's grown in such a harsh environment. To Dean Baker, though, water means he can turn unproductive desert into fertile farmland. This is his home, and unlike other ranchers in the area, he's not going to sell out to Las Vegas.
This is our life. You know, my boys or my family and I talked about this Southern Nevada thing when it became clear that they were coming, and they made it also clear that they would purchase everything. And obviously we could have sold for money, and it was unanimous in the family that we didn't want the money, that we'd rather have our lifestyle.
Baker's stubborn opposition to the water grab is more than hubris. He thinks there's solid evidence on his own property that the pipeline will usher in an environmental catastrophe. It's as obvious as a hole in the ground, he says.
And if you want to look down in this hole right here, I think it's either coyotes or badgers, but they come and dig down so they can keep getting a drink out of it. That's where the water table has gone to, where 50 years or so ago it would have been up to our waist, or even 20 years ago it would have been up to our knees.
Baker says the lesson is clear. The comparatively small amount of water pumping initiated by Snake Valley ranchers has already caused a dramatic drop in the water table. The Water Authority wants to take billions of gallons out of here.
The pumping we do for agriculture is small in comparison to what Southern Nevada wants to do. But around every area in this valley, the springs have dried up like this in the cone of depression. And the more you pump, the farther out it goes. And you've got to remember that we're pulling the water out and putting it back on the ground.
Las Vegas will be pulling it out and piping it south. The sheer size of the proposed water grab is daunting. Imagine digging a broad trench from the outskirts of Las Vegas all the way through rural Clark County, across the entirety of Lincoln County, and then up into remote valleys of White Pine County, 300 miles from downtown Las Vegas. Trenches for the pipeline would have to be dug in heat-baked, rock-hard dirt over mountains and valleys. Although water officials will not be able to take everything they filed for in 6 rural basins, not yet anyway, the pipeline system keeps getting bigger every time it's described. As of December 2007, water officials estimate the pipe and its various fingers could total nearly 600 miles and will suck billions of gallons from underneath an area that is already a drought emergency zone. Water officials say this won't hurt a bit, since all of this will be unused excess water. They promise to take steps to protect the environment, even to stop pumping from certain areas if the water level drops too much.
Some people have called me Pollyanna, but I promise you the day will come that the ranchers that continue to ranch in Spring Valley on their own, and we are going to lease out the ranches that we have bought in order to perpetuate ranching in those areas and the revenue to White Pine County, they will be grateful we're there.
Should rural Nevadans trust the promises? What if the water experts are simply wrong?
Once we build that pipeline, you're going to have effects that are felt for hundreds of years.
And I don't like the idea of my place potentially drying up for another condo or another casino in Las Vegas.
When we first interviewed rancher Brandon Humphreys in 2004, he was a die-hard opponent of the water grab and vowed to do whatever it took to stop the pipeline. Today, he works for the Water Authority, which spent $6 million to buy this 800-acre ranch, then kept Humphreys on as manager. In the Spring Valley, Las Vegas water officials have gobbled up every ranch that would sell at prices 4 to 5 times their market value. One ranch, purchased out of bankruptcy for $4 million by a private land and water speculator, was sold to SNWA for $22 million. Another ranch, worth $1 million for its land, fetched $32 million from the Water Authority. It's not the acreage that determines the price, it's the water, says Pat Mulroy, who admits the ranchers demand and get way more than top dollar.
Who else are you going to sell ranches to for that kind of money? So when we come into a valley, obviously the price goes up.
SNWA has shelled out around $100 million for ranch properties. Other public agencies spending that kind of money would have to obtain independent appraisals before making a deal, but SNWA is exempt from that requirement. Former White Pine Commissioner John Chachas understands why his neighbors would sell out for such serious paydays, but wonders if Clark County taxpayers understand what's being done with public money.
I would raise the flag and sound the alarm. Is Southern Nevada Water Authority going through the appraisal process to determine these $1 million figures? I don't think so.
There is no room for error.
But there is a degree of oversight. Pat Mulroy negotiates the purchases, then seeks approval from the Water Board, made up of elected officials. Board members whose election campaigns are funded largely by pro-growth business interests, including casinos and developers, have never overruled one of her purchases. When County Commissioner Chris June-Kiliani voted against one of the most expensive ranch acquisitions because there was no independent appraisal of the property, she was condemned in a newspaper editorial for betraying her constituents. The big money in Las Vegas is solidly behind the pipeline plan.
These are huge problems.
In White Pine, the pressure is no less intense. Brent Eldridge is the chairman of the county commission. His family's property in Spring Valley is coveted by SNWA and could be worth more than $30 million. No formal offer has been made, but Eldridge announced last year that he would no longer vote on any issue related to the water grab because it might cross an ethical line. He says ranchers don't have much of a choice because the land could be sucked dry whether they sell or not.
The prices paid today are far in excess of what another rancher could pay for those ranches. However, if those ranches are going to be impacted in some way by pumping of the water, and where the well fields are situated right among the ranches that they're buying up, it's probably wise to take what's offered and go ranch somewhere else.
The purchases have two other side effects. They effectively muzzle the voices of the ranchers in the debate over the water grab, voices that are among the most respected in rural communities. And since SNWA is a public agency, any land it owns is removed from local property tax rolls, a huge loss in cash-strapped rural counties. As a good faith gesture, Pat Mulroy has promised to continue paying property taxes.
And early on they said that they would pay taxes, or the payment in lieu of taxes. They haven't yet, and they keep dragging their feet on paying those taxes. They try and project themselves as being nice guys, and that, but when it comes down to it, they're not going to do anything to help White Pine County until we sign an agreement with them.
Mulroy and the SNWA have assured White Pine County that Las Vegas will be a good neighbor and will keep the ranches operating.
By us managing that groundwater basin and keeping those water tables up, by recharging that surface water into the ground and not letting it evaporate, we will be protecting those ranchers.
The idea that government employees from Las Vegas might instruct lifelong ranchers how to cope with drought is seen as hilarious among the ranchers, who say SNWA's first-year returns from sheep and cattle operations are a disaster, with huge financial losses already.
That it takes more than a big belt buckle and a new pair of boots and a Stetson hat to run one of these ranches, and yeah.
Hank Vogler owns 600 acres at the northern tip of Spring Valley and has grazing permits for 1 million acres of BLM land for his sheep and cattle. His water rights were too meager to be coveted by SNWA. He's the only rancher in the valley who hasn't been approached about a possible sale. Vogler says his ranch has been sabotaged, his employees intimidated, and his livestock endangered by the hired help now running neighboring ranches. Although Vogler sits on 2 state commissions and has a high profile in his community, he worries that he and his family are in someone's way.
It is scary. I never thought I would be in fear like that, but I don't, you know, you expect Robert De Niro, you know, or Al Pacino to show up in your, I don't know. I mean, there is so much money. Vegas has, look at the banks that would go broke if that thing collapsed. I mean, there is so much money riding on the success of Las Vegas.
Since this interview, Vogler says he received a visit from water officials, but nothing was done to address his concerns. Water officials imply Vogler is simply not telling the truth. Coming up, predictions of doom and gloom.
We're looking at tens of thousands of square miles that are going to be affected in the Great Basin.
Coyote Springs seems an unlikely place to build 150,000 homes and 10 golf courses. For one thing, it's in the middle of nowhere. For another, it's one of the driest spots in a very dry state. But influential lobbyist Harvey Whittemore considers these facts to be mere speed bumps on the road to untold riches. Whittemore got a sweet deal when he bought 43,000 acres for $23 million, then sold part of his water rights to SNWA's Pat Mulroy for $25 million. He essentially got the land for free, then went shopping for water-rich ranches further north so he can one day ship that water via Mulroy's pipeline down to his development. In addition to Whittemore's claims to groundwater in Coyote Springs, SNWA also plans to pump water from here, along with the Moapa tribe and Lincoln County's water district. Can there possibly be enough water to go around?
There's not enough water.
Hydrologist Dr. Martin Mifflin knows more about Nevada groundwater than any person alive. He studied it for 50 years, especially Coyote Springs. The parties with claims to Coyote Springs water are deceiving themselves and the public, he says.
The danger of going forward with something when you already have the types of information that says you shouldn't is pretty clear. You have two different developments based on the same water. The thing that has bothered me is that all of these relationships are fairly well known, and they've all been ignored, and I think purposely. Because everybody wants more water.
Mifflin's opinion is shared by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which concluded that groundwater pumping in the valley would quickly cause the water table to drop, which would devastate places like Warm Springs, home to the endangered Moapa dace. But SNWA came to the rescue by purchasing Warm Springs for $69 million, thus clearing the way for water pumping by Whittemore and others. Federal agencies which had vigorously opposed this plan abruptly withdrew their objections. The perceived coziness of these political relationships is deeply troubling to Lincoln County residents who, like their neighbors in White Pine County, are worried that their precious water is being sold down the river.
And we feel like our livelihood is going to come to an end because of developers who just want to become more wealthy, and it's almost a shame.
When the developers in Las Vegas say, well, we're just going after the unused water, that's a lie. I mean, everything in Lincoln County is up for sale, and it's going into the hands of the developers.
These aquifers all interconnect one way or another underground. You know, some have more, some have less, but these are pretty substantial aquifers, and this Big Spring is what's been supporting this valley ever since the pioneers came in here in 1864. And it's basically the livelihood of this valley. If this spring was to get depleted, it would be absolutely another Owens Valley.
The example of Owens Valley has often been invoked by opponents of the water grab. That once water-rich California valley was transformed into a dust bowl when Los Angeles launched its own water grab. If, as Dr. Mifflin and many other experts suspect, Nevada's groundwater basins are connected at some level, far below the surface, then siphoning billions of gallons each year from rural counties could cause a vast area to wither and die.
The impact is going to drop the water table by, Utah scientists estimate, by at least 50 feet, maybe more than 100 feet. There is no desert vegetation with root systems that deep. So what does that mean? The vegetation dies. We're looking at tens of thousands of square miles that are going to be affected in the Great Basin.
To affect an area from Indian Springs to Baker, Nevada, that will affect the groundwater a minimum of twice as much as climate change has affected the groundwater table in the last 15,000 years.
Dr. Deacon predicts as many as 150 species, many of them already endangered, will be wiped out because of the water grab. The first damage will show up at springs, he says. Rural Nevada is dotted with springs, many of them the source of water for wildlife refuges, such as the Key Pittman Refuge in Lincoln County and Ash Springs, and the Pahranagat National Refuge, a special place considered by the Paiutes to be their Garden of Eden. The effects could easily be felt as far away as the Devil's Hole. The U.S. Geological Survey studied the water grab and determined it would have a devastating effect on the hydrology of the Great Basin National Park, including its creeks and the spectacular Lehman Caves, saying harmful effects would be, quote, likely. Other agencies of the Interior Department echoed these concerns. But then, poof, on the night before a key hearing in front of Nevada's water engineer, a deal was reached with SNWA, and all the federal objections evaporated, similar to what occurred later concerning Coyote Springs. The superintendent of the Great Basin National Park said he couldn't even talk about it.
What happened was that this national administration has appointed a coordinator with the Department of Interior to coordinate the response of the various interior agencies. That's USGS, Indian Affairs, Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM. And that coordination, in effect, is an order to remove the objections in whatever way they can be removed.
Mister, I would tell you right now, there are some very concerned people at the Bureau of Land Management. There's some very concerned people at the Forest Service, and they're all smart enough to know that their next assignment will be counting polar bear turds in Point Barrow, Alaska, if they step out into the mainstream of this one.
Pat Mulroy says the agencies backed off because SNWA promised to conduct ongoing monitoring programs and to shut down parts of the pumping if any bad effects were detected. You'd be hard-pressed to find a single person in rural Nevada who believes the pumps would shut down once the water is flowing into Las Vegas homes. Mulroy admits no one knows for sure whether the water basins are interconnected.
Nobody does. Nobody does, but unless we find out, this state's in big trouble.
And the way to find out is to start pumping. Critics say that's putting the cart before the horse.
When they pass a law that enables something, and then they say, go ahead and do the NEPA studies anyway, there's kind of a foregone conclusion that's built into it.
But this water is it's as pure as you can get. We drink the water here.
There are 7 artesian springs on the 640-acre ranch owned by Dwight Bass in the Steptoe Valley, enough water to supply his horses, cattle, and family. But Bass sees a threat on the horizon. Plans by 2 power companies to build coal plants on both ends of the valley. The groundwater that'll be pumped to those plants could suck his springs dry. And if the power companies don't grab his water, someone else will probably try.
Taking these springs and deleting our water. And like you say, once they delete our water, there's no reason for us to even be here anymore.
Bass is hardly an anti-growth crusader. For 30 years, he's made his living as a contractor in Las Vegas. The ranch is for his family and his retirement. In an area already hit hard by years of drought, he knows that sustained large-scale pumping will decimate the springs, and he's not buying the assurances he's heard.
To be honest with you, I don't believe anything that these power companies have to tell the public, and again, the water companies the same way. They'll do whatever it takes to keep the growth in Las Vegas going.
Water officials say the rurals have nothing to fear. Their lawyer told a state hearing, quote, the critics are like a boy whistling in the dark, and that they should trust SNWA's ingenuity and engineering. But Las Vegas water agencies have been dead wrong many times in recent years and on major issues. Now that SNWA has convinced federal agencies to back off any monitoring program, evaluating the effects of the water grab will be left to the same people who are taking the water in the first place.
It's the old fox watching the hen house situation. And,
biologist Dr. Larry Paulson spent 30 years monitoring the water quality of Lake Mead. When he began to report that the lake was suffering because of increased wastewater discharges, the monitoring duties were taken over by the agencies doing the discharging.
This has a lot more to do with the economy than the ecology.
One of Paulson's warnings back in the late 90s was that increased discharges of treated sewage would cause algae blooms in the lake. Sure enough, in 2001, a massive algae outbreak turned the lake into pea soup. Water officials said it would evaporate in a few weeks. 6 months later, it was still around. Water officials denied it had anything to do with the nitrogen content of treated wastewater. But when they reluctantly reduced the nitrogen flow, the algae died and never returned. Water officials say they constantly test the lake for contaminants, but they never knew the lake was polluted with perchlorate from rocket fuel until officials in California informed them. Mutations in fish in Lake Mead are suspected of having a link to urban runoff. Water officials say they don't see the evidence. The growth of Las Vegas means more and more effluent traveling through the Las Vegas Wash. The increased erosion has pummeled the wash and wiped out wetlands. Those who work on the lake think water officials routinely downplay the harm and risks because the agencies overtly support more growth.
You can't just keep adding more effluent water with the same quantity and the same quality and expect it to get better.
Something else that's been minimized over the years by water officials is the threat of drought. Las Vegas, after all, is in the Mojave Desert, which gets 4 inches of rain per year. In the 80s, the seminal book Cadillac Desert warned of the folly of huge water projects in western deserts and how nature always interferes and prevails. In 1991, Time magazine dubbed the Colorado River the nation's most endangered. For more than 20 years, former federal water planner Mark Bird has tried to get Las Vegas water officials to pay attention to reality, namely that drought on the Colorado is the norm and that the 20th century was a wet aberration. Bird pointed to studies of ancient tree rings on the Colorado as proof of extended droughts. Water officials scoffed at him, he says, perhaps because any acknowledgement of our limited water resources would have been bad for business. Water officials not only resisted mandatory conservation programs, they did not adopt a formal drought plan until 2003, more than 4 years into the current drought.
We should have had a drought plan decades ago. That's part of the problem.
As recently as 2000, Pat Mulroy assured the community that lower levels in the lake were nothing to worry about, that our water supply was secure for the next 50 years.
And with the Colorado going into an entirely new reality, something the Bureau of Reclamation never said was possible.
Critics say Mulroy's agency should have known what was coming, and the lack of preparation is hardly the fault of federal agencies. Billions of public dollars are poured into local water projects that enabled, even encouraged, more growth, in defiance of the limitations imposed by nature. The reaction to Bird's warnings?
Silence.
Now, Nevadans are being asked to trust SNWA's judgment about the potential effects of a massive water grab. Water officials downplay the potential effects and say anyone who disagrees is wrong. Dr. Martin Mifflin says the evidence is clear. The water table will drop. Dr. Jim Deacon says species will be wiped out. Studies by Nevada ecologist Dr. David Charlette predict devastation comparable to the Owens Valley, from Spring Valley in the north to Pahranagat and the other valleys of Lincoln County. All of them are wrong, SNWA says. Federal agencies, including BLM, Fish and Wildlife, and the Park Service, each predicted terrible consequences from the water grab. Then the agencies were ordered to back off. This federal pamphlet for the Moapa Dace states that the water that keeps the dace alive traveled underground to Warm Springs from a source near Ely. Not to worry, says SNWA. Ranchers who spent their lives working the land can't be trusted either. But what about SNWA's own scientists? Dr. Tim Durbin developed the models used to justify the water grab. He warned the state engineer that the basins are interconnected and urged more study. SNWA opposes a study of potential environmental effects. This draft report of a 1990 study commissioned by the Water District is as close to a smoking gun as we might ever see. The conclusions and predictions are nearly identical to the objections raised by today's critics of the pipeline. One prediction is that water authorities would eventually grab much more water than originally planned, resulting in environmental degradation, effects that could be permanent. Surface vegetation could be wiped out and never recover, which the authors compared to Owens Valley. Natural springs would dry up, destroying wildlife habitat and endangered species. Water quality for rural residents would deteriorate. Hunting and rural tourism would suffer. And in Las Vegas itself, more water would mean more growth, with as many as 5 million residents in the valley, resulting in a, quote, significant decline in our quality of life. The study also predicted there would certainly be other unanticipated effects. So what happened to this study? It's barely seen the light of day since it was written 28 years ago. Are there alternatives to the water grab and uncontrolled growth? More on that in the conclusion of Crossfire. know what 25 straight years of tops-in-the-nation growth means to you, you'll have time to think about it the next time you visit the DMV and stand in those interminable lines. Or maybe you can ruminate about growth as you sit in the daily gridlock on our roads and highways, or as you're trying to dodge those ubiquitous construction projects that drag on for years. If you like congestion and noise and urban sprawl, you're going to love what comes next. Las Vegas is on the brink of another boom that will double our population by 2035. Let that sink in. Instead of 2 million people crowding our classrooms, emergency rooms, and courtrooms, the valley will have 4 million. Given Nevada's historical reluctance to pay for basic services, our collective quality of life could plummet.
When they dig up Las Vegas in the 500 or 1,000 years from now, and there's going to be all the speculation in the world why anybody built this town where they did, because there's obviously no water.
Rancher Hank Vogler and his neighbors in White Pine County are 250 miles from the Las Vegas Strip, but still they're in the way, impediments to Southern Nevada's manifest destiny. The groundwater resources of the Spring Valley are considered essential to the grandiose plans of Clark County movers and shakers. For the record, it has nothing to do with growth.
If not one more person moved into Southern Nevada, we'd have to build this system.
That's the new and improved mantra for Pat Mulroy and her agencies, that the pipeline must be built not to support more growth, but to protect our families. Mulroy insists she's neutral on the question of growth and that SNWA is just doing its job. But she doesn't sound all that neutral when scolding those who ask questions or while warning the public about perceived boogeymen.
Now, you tell me that you're going to put this community that much at risk. Look at what's happening in Atlanta. This would be Atlanta on steroids. So am I supposed to sit here and say, oh, well, whatever Mother Nature deals cards that she deals me, I'm simply going to accept, and the fate of 2 million people doesn't matter to me. They're just going to have to live with whatever Mother Nature decides to dole out. That is about as irresponsible a statement as I've ever heard someone come up with. But can you afford not to build it? Are you willing to put your family at risk? That's what it gets down to.
It's going to be built, isn't it? You really honestly believe it's going to be built?
There is no option.
No other option, or no other option under serious consideration? For the past several years, water officials have argued that Las Vegas needs rural water to sustain our growth and prosperity. They don't say it anymore for a simple reason. Opinion surveys show the public, by an overwhelming margin, is sick of growth. When a newspaper survey showed 75% support for slower growth, Mulroy dismissed the results as a, quote, visceral reaction, explaining that the public simply doesn't understand the situation. She then spent hundreds of thousands of public dollars on a counter-study which found, to the surprise of no one, that a sudden and complete halt to Las Vegas growth would destroy the economy of the entire state. No public official has even mentioned a draconian end to all growth, but the study generated predictable headlines in Las Vegas. In a sense, the enduring drought is the best thing that could have happened to the water grab, since advocates can say it's all about water security, not about building more casinos. Southern Nevada did not adopt its first ever drought plan until 2003, 4 years into the current drought. The agency has been known to manipulate data and change the ground rules. Rural counties have repeatedly asked for water studies so they could know for sure the effects of a water grab. SNWA has said no.
We want proof of what they're claiming, and they've never provided that to our satisfaction.
Prior to the big hearing to decide if SNWA could take water from Spring Valley, Pat Mulroy told the Las Vegas Sun the state engineer could be fired if he said no. Mulroy then said her remark was taken out of context. In the hearing itself, SNWA tried to limit what could be considered.
They petitioned the state engineer to eliminate scenic values, environmental concerns, and recreational values from the hearings, period. Now, when you transfer water in this state, if you take water out of the same basin, you're not subject to major environmental restrictions.
The state engineer approved less than half of SNWA's request for water from Spring Valley, but that was enough to greenlight the proposed pipeline. Federal agencies will have to study possible environmental effects, but even those rules were changed.
Originally, the BLM said it would have to look at the impact of the pumping. Now the BLM, under political pressure from the Water Authority and their allies, has changed the EIS, so they're really only looking at the impact of putting in the pipeline itself, not the pumping.
Would SNWA withhold information that doesn't support its case? Critics say that's exactly what was done with groundwater models created by hydrologist Tim Durbin, hired by SNWA to predict what would happen to water levels if pumping was initiated in Coyote Springs and in Spring Valley. SNWA paid for Durbin's model, but told the state water engineer it never bothered to run the model in order to see the results. Opponents used the same information and played it out.
It showed that water level would decline quite a bit as a result of the proposed pumping in Spring Valley.
One of the most elusive pieces of information in the water grab debate is what's the real cost. In the 90s, SNWA said it would cost $1 billion. Then the estimate went to $2 billion, then to $3 billion, and now $3.5 billion. More money than the entire state budget. In a study 20 years ago, Dr. Martin Mifflin figured the cost would be closer to $12 billion. Water planner Mark Bird thinks the true cost will be closer to $20 billion, and that SNWA is purposely omitting some of the expenses.
Well, it may be in their best interest to make an absolutely low estimate for public relations purposes.
In recent comments, Pat Mulroy has made it clear we have to build the pipeline no matter what it costs. Without question, it will be the largest and most expensive public works project in Nevada history. SNWA gives little credence to alternatives such as desalting plants, slower growth, or greater conservation. A study by the Pacific Institute estimated that Las Vegas could meet its needs without the pipeline through conservation. Mulroy said the study was based on eliminating every blade of grass in the valley, a claim which is flatly untrue. State Senator Bob Beers thinks it makes more sense to buy large ranches in California than take their vast water holdings out of the Colorado River. It would be cheaper and without environmental risks. Beers said SNWA won't even talk about his plan. If the pipeline is built and it helps to fuel a new round of runaway growth, does this merely postpone the economic crash predicted by SNWA? Does anyone believe Las Vegas can continue this growth forever? 4 years into the current drought, we asked the #2 water official whether water need ever limit Las Vegas growth.
I don't think so. I mean, do we have a 100-year supply of food?
There needs to be no limit on our growth.
I don't think water should limit your growth, no.
Unlimited. We can have an unlimited number of people in this valley because we've got, is that what you mean?
I think if you continue to manage water and develop these options, if you want to pay for it, you probably can garner water resources.
I would think that's a never-ending cycle. You're building yourself into doing the same thing over and over again. And you're saying, well, let's see, we want to change the outcome. Okay, let's do the same thing harder. You don't get a different outcome by doing the same thing over and over again.
Growth in Las Vegas is the reason that this water project is being proposed. I don't doubt Pat Mulroy's sincerity in her effort to try to minimize the damage, but the process we're looking at here is not one of the lifetime of Pat Mulroy or of the people now making the decisions. It's the lifetime of the earth.